They came with warnings measured in words meant to be read on screens and heard through loudspeakers, and in the undertone of a Navy on watch. On April 25, Iran's most powerful military body, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, issued a statement that read like a paragraph from a strategic playbook. Any fresh attack by the United States or Israel, the IRGC said, would be met with a response beyond the enemy's expectations and at a level of strategic deterrence. Those are not casual words. They are the vocabulary of escalation, of preparing a population and an armed force for the possibility that a confined crisis will widen into sustained conflict. They are also the words of a state broadcasting intent, control of the waterways, readiness for ground operations, even the erection of facilities to hold prisoners of war, all listed in the same breath as a public declaration of resolve. The IRGC statement, urgent and stark, also said Iran will continue to police transit through the Strait of Hormuz, restricting coordinated passage of vessels linked to the United States, Israel, and affiliated entities, and that this posture would remain even after the current conflict ends, the scene playing out as part diplomatic, part military, and part theater. It is three acts at once. Negotiations taking place in Islamabad, ships and aircraft skimming contested waters, and leaders at home calibrating what they will say to domestic audiences and what they will be willing to do on the world stage. In Islamabad, Pakistan had stepped forward as a mediator, hosting talks intended to secure a ceasefire and a pathway to broader diplomacy. Iran sent a delegation. Its foreign minister, Abbas Araqi, traveled to Pakistan and made clear he had presented Tehran's position on ending the war. But the talks in Pakistan foundered. Iranian officials described U.S. demands as excessive. The ceasefire was fragile, it expired, and was then extended unilaterally by Washington, a move that only deepened Iranian suspicions that diplomacy was being conducted under pressure rather than through parity. In Washington, the White House announced envoys would travel to Pakistan. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, designated as special envoys for peace missions, were slated to pick up the negotiations on the ground. Vice President J.D. Vance was reported to be ready in Washington to step in as needed. Then, on April 25, President Donald Trump called that plan off, telling reporters the travel was too burdensome. "We're not going to spend 15 hours in airplanes all the time," he said, and inviting Tehran to pick up the phone if it wanted to talk. "All they have to do is call," he added. What looks like a logistical gripe, the length of a flight, the inconvenience of travel, masks a deeper strategic choice, canceling in-person talks, signals impatience with the mediation process. It can be a negotiating tactic, a refusal to accord legitimacy to interlocutors seen as essentially influential, or a demonstration of pressure meant to extract concessions. But it can also narrow options for de-escalation. When parties refuse to sit at the table in the same space, the remaining channels are public statements, back-channel contacts, and military posturing, all of which are more likely to produce miscalculation. The IRGC statement offers an unambiguous political context for its military posture. It asserted that Iran would escalate the severity of retaliation if attacked, saying any further aggression from the enemy camp and the ill wishes of this land will undoubtedly be met with a response beyond the enemy's expectations at a level of strategic deterrence. Hints at a doctrine in which punishment and the credible threat of punishment are used to prevent further action by an adversary. But deterrence only works when both sides believe the other's threats are credible and proportional. If one side perceives that the threat is bluster, or the other believes the threat implies a red line they must cross, deterrence can fail and escalation can follow. In a parallel statement the same day, Iran's Khatam al-Anbaya central headquarters, the country's joint military command, condemned what it called naval piracy, blockade, and banditry by American forces in the region, and pledged a decisive response to continued harassment. The statement stressed readiness to defend sovereignty and national interests, and reiterated that Iran would maintain tight control over the strait. "We are ready and determined to inflict even more severe losses on American-Israeli aggressors in the event of any new violation," the military notice declared. If this language sounds theatrical, it is worth remembering the setting. The Strait of Hormuz is the most acute physical choke point in the world for oil and trade. A significant portion of global maritime energy supplies flows through that narrow waterway. Any restriction, over temporary or local, raises insurance rates, reroutes shipping, and imposes economic pain well beyond the region. That gives statements about control of the strait practical weight, not just rhetorical power. Iran's leaders have also signaled their confidence in domestic cohesion and used that unity as a counterpoint to what they portray as a fracturing adversary. A senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader, a member of the Expediency Discernment Council, posted a message on social media that was as blunt as it was charged with nationalist imagery. With the strong hand of Iran's valiant sons and the tightly knit ranks of the devoted nation, the sound of America's broken bones will echo from the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman to the ears of the world. The advisor's comments framed the conflict as both existential and redemptive, a test of Iranian strength against what he described as American strategic blunders. Those lines are meant not only for foreign capitals and military night, but for domestic audiences. Wartime rhetoric rivets public attention and shapes expectations by emphasizing unity and portraying the opposition as morally and structurally fractured. Iran's messaging seeks to harden popular support and to sap the legitimacy of negotiation positions perceived as coercive. At the same time, Tehran has been accused in Western media of tightening control over shipping, restricting coordinated passage for vessels linked to the United States, Israel, and affiliates, while allowing other traffic under set conditions. Such measures are intended to raise the political and economic costs for adversaries, yet they walk a precarious tightrope. Blockading or bottlenecking commercial maritime traffic invites international censure and risks military responses that can quickly escalate. From Washington's vantage point, these developments heighten the strategic calculus. The United States has publicly warned of potential deployments of troops to strategic locations in the Gulf, even to islands off Iran's coast, as leverage to keep commercial passage open and to pressure Tehran to ease restrictions. For Iran, any U.S. restrictions. For Iran, any U.S. event. Landings near its territorial periphery would constitute a significant escalation. The IRGC's mention of preparations for ground operations and even prisoner of war camps read plainly as a warning that Iran is contemplating and preparing for scenarios that previously might have seemed distant. The diplomatic chessboard remains precarious. Pakistan's role as a mediator underscored a regional appetite to contain the conflict and to prevent a wider conflagration. Islamabad's willingness to host talks reflected both its interest in stability and its positioning as a regional interlocutor. But the failure of those talks to achieve a lasting compromise, the U.S. decision to extend the ceasefire unilaterally and then the cancellation of planned envoys' travel have all combined to narrow the options available for a negotiated settlement. On the American side, officials have defended the decision not to travel as a matter of pragmatism and sovereign choice, a refusal, they say, to expend time and political capital without assurances that the interlocutors in Pakistan would be the decisive figures. President Trump's blunt appraisal that his envoys would be wasting too much time and that if Iran wants talks, all they have to do is call is shorthand for a transactional approach to diplomacy that prizes leverage and directness over prolonged mediation. But the art of negotiation in such crises often requires in-person trust building, time at hard tables, and the ability to read the faces and tones that get lost over secure calls. Short-circuiting that can speed up political cover and public signaling, but it also closes the door on informal compromises, the kind of small creative concessions that can buy breathing room and prevent kinetic steps. The practical risk is that public statements of maximalist positions will become the new normal, the only permissible bargaining chips, and that both sides will find themselves stuck on the hard edges of public rhetoric. When leaders have audiences at home to reassure or rally, they may be less willing to quietly concede. That political logic is a powerful force in the background of every battlefield calculation. Beyond messaging and mediation, there are military realities, Iran's naval capabilities, ace-around naval capabilities, asymmetric missile forces, and regional proxies give it a range of options to signal and to strike. The United States, for its part, maintains a formidable forward presence in the Gulf of Oman, and in carrier task groups that can impose costs. Israel, too, figures prominently in Tehran's calculus. The IRGC statement named the Israeli regime alongside the United States as a potential target of retaliation. That language broadens the possible theaters of conflict and raises the stakes for allies who might otherwise try to keep distance. For neutral actors and for global markets, the immediate worry is disruption. Energy markets are volatile precisely because they are sensitive to perceptions of supply risk. Even talk of closing or bottlenecking the Strait of Hormuz can spike prices, alter shipping lanes, and push nations to seek contingency supplies or to reconfigure existing contracts. For economies already juggling inflation and growth concerns, that is an unwelcome complication. For regional states, the imperative is containment. Neighbors fear contagion not only because of direct military danger, but because domestic politics can be destabilized by refugees, sanctions, or economic shocks. That is why nations like Pakistan took on the mediator role. The cost of conflict in South and Central Asia can be existential for many capitals in the neighborhood. So where does this leave the world after April 25? The immediate horizon is tense, but not yet cataclysmic. Iran's statements are stern and specific. Washington's public behavior alternates between engagement and high-handed maneuvering. Mediators have been invited but left disappointed, and the naval posture in the region remains a charged, visible fact. There are a few simple truths that should guide observers and decision-makers alike. First, rhetoric and hardware both matter. When leaders publicly promise to deliver responses beyond expectations, they raise the likelihood those responses will be tested. Second, the more diplomacy is offloaded to statements and away from sustained in-person negotiation, the greater the risk of miscalculation. Third, regional actors will remain central to any effective settlement. Outsiders can leverage power, but regional buy-in and enforcement are essential. Finally, observers should watch for a few concrete signals that will tell us whether the crisis is de-escalating or hardening. Look for resumed substantive talks in which negotiators exchange concrete, verifiable steps rather than rehearse opening positions. Watch shipping lanes. If restrictions ease and coordinated passage resumes broadly, the immediate crisis may be loosening. Pay attention to military movements that could be reversible, repositioning rather than permanent deployments, versus those that are harder to unwind, such as new bases or long-term occupation plans. And monitor domestic political cues. Leaders who prepare their populations for concessions are more likely to accept them. On April 25, Iran made clear it believes it can withstand pressure and that it is ready to meet new aggression with forceful replies. The United States signaled impatience with the mediation process that it judged insufficiently effective, and it called for direct contact instead of a long, costly flight. Between those postures lies a narrow corridor where diplomacy could still work. The window is not indefinitely open. Closed rooms, long flights, and public brinksmanship do not mix easily. They tend to compress time and incompress. SCFS time, errors multiply. For the world watching, the question is whether cooler heads will allow that corridor to remain usable. If they do, there is room, however narrow, for negotiated breathing space and for mechanisms that can prevent an episodic clash from morphing into a wider war. If they do not, the threats now uttered in statements on the water and in social media posts stand ready to be tested, with consequences that would be felt far beyond the Gulf's narrow strait. For now, the instruments of coercion and the apparatus of mediation are both on display. The next moves will tell us whether those instruments will be wielded to build a fragile peace or to redraw lines by force. The world watches and ships continue to cross the seas with the thinnest margin for error separating passage from peril.